There we go. So thank you everybody for joining us for our extended school year. What is it and when is it determined? We will get started in just a second. I did want to go ahead and mention to folks that we do have some other trainings coming up. So I encourage you to check the Family Connection calendar. I will also be posting in the chat if you have some very specific questions or need more intensive assistance, you can always submit a referral to Family Connection. And so I'll put the link for that in the chat. But for now, I'm going to go ahead and turn this over to Dr. Susan Thomas. Dr. Thomas is a former special education director. She is our resident expert on all things special education and is going to be sharing some information with us today all about ESY. So Susan, thank you so much for joining us today.
I'm so glad to be here, and I'm going to correct you on that resident expert. I'm just the resident learner as I continue to try to grow in my knowledge, because there is so much that we are still learning, and every time I work on these things, I kind of get a different viewpoint. I think that's why it's important for us to be in a cycle of continuous learning. I'm going to get my screen up and running here, and hopefully. Hold just 1 minute. There we go. How about it? And we'll get started talking about extended school year. And we are going to talk about kind of the what, the who, the when, the how, the why, because sometimes this can be a little bit confusing. And people have some different viewpoints about extended school year. And of course, it's important for us to kind of have some clarity and think together about what we're supposed to be doing. And I always like to go to the law. And I know that Melissa, you will be glad to share this presentation with our participants. And if you notice, if you click right here, we're right there. If you get this, that will actually take you to the link where this is in the law. And this is what the law says about ESY. Not much. And so they've kind of left it for states to give guidance. And sometimes that leads, guidance documents are just that, they're guidance. And so then people kind of create their own policies and practices. And but I think there's some really big key points that we need to remember about ESY that help us when we're decision making. And that's why I want to talk about that today. I will, I always want to talk about the importance of our district and school personnel. And this is probably, as a former special education director, one of the hardest things, particularly during the summer, for us to address. Because teachers are tired during by the time the year end is. And so getting staff and really getting arrangements and transportation and all of those things for ESY is really quite a job. And so we want to work together and collaboratively with school districts and staff, understanding that this is part of the law, that what we have to provide. So I'm not going to read this to you because I'm going to kind of go through it, but just know that this is the portion of the law that addresses it. So this is what the law says ESY really is. It's special education and related services. It's provided to a child with a disability. It is beyond the normal school year. And a lot of times we think that just means summer break. But remember, that's any kind of breaks that we might provide it. The law doesn't really define it. A lot of times we think of it as summer, but it could be different times. It is in accordance with the child's IEP, so it's not something separate. And then, of course, remember, it has to be free at no cost to the parent. And then they have another line in the law that says it must meet the standards of the state. So our state regulations pretty much mirror the federal regulations as far as ESY is concerned. But there is some guidance that the state provides, and I'll be sharing that with you a little bit later. So who's eligible? All students with disabilities. If they have an IEP, they go into the eligibility pool. So you can't say, well, we only serve students with autism during extended school year, or we don't serve students with learning disabilities, or we don't serve students with other health impairments. Our programs are for, we have to make these decisions. They're all eligible. And so that's very clear in the law that we can't exclude a certain group, and that's important. And then why did they put this all, I love the law. I love IDEA because all of a sudden it's like they pop things in, and ESY is one of those things that's like, okay, now ESY. But the reason is to ensure that free, appropriate public education, which is what we talk about, that FAPE. And remember that this is how we kind of define FAPE. It means special education, which means specially designed instruction. That is the definition of special education. So I always say, if students aren't getting specially designed instruction and they don't need that, then they probably don't need an IEP, because that is the very heart of what we're doing. It also means related services. And remember, those related services are so students can benefit from their special education. And then we have that it must meet the child's unique needs. So we have to design this. I always remind people that this is about each child. Yes, standards are there. Yes, we have to think about that, but we start with the child's needs and then look at how are we going to get them progressing towards those outcomes that we want for them, that are aligned with our standards.
Now,
So
Susan,
that's
I have a quick question.
sure.
And whenever you've got on here, related services. So would it ever be, if my child has, because I'm assuming during ESY, are we just working on the IEP goals, or are we working on everything my child would have been working on in third grade?
Oh, well, we're going to talk about that a little bit, Melissa, but that is a great question, because when we make those decisions for ESY, we might not be working on the whole IEP. So that's a great, when I said related services, so we may determine that a child needs a extended school year with a related service like occupational therapy. So let's just say, let's give an example, because I like those. I'm a student that has a communication device that we're really going to we've started working on it, and we're going to really ramp that up, in the next school year as we're continuing to work on their special education goals. We might just be providing that assistive technology piece with a speech therapist and occupational therapist working together to work with that child on the use of that communication device. And so that would be embedded in their goal, because we got to have a goal, but we can create one too. Does that make sense?
It well, because whenever I saw the related services, that's what prompted me to think, wait a minute, would there ever be a time where we only work on speech, or we were only working on, like you mentioned, OT or assistive tech or something like that? So thank you.
All righty. Okay, so we know why we have it. So let's talk about when we make decisions about ESY. So I love this answer, and I learned this a long time ago, and our attorney at the State Department uses it all the time. Barbara Drayton will say, well, it all depends. And so we know that it has to be considered at the initial IEP or at annual review. And sometimes we're able to do that very easily. We're able to say, you know what, there's nothing that we see, that the child's going to need ESY. I want you to remember, though, that can change anytime. So let's just say I'm doing an IEP in October, and the IEP team says, you know what, child's not going to need IEP, ESY services. It's a no. But then we get to April and go, whew, we've got a different situation now. And so we can always go into special reviews to consider ESY. Okay. That's not just at the annual review. And remember, anytime we see that that IEP is not working to provide a FAPE, we got to get in a meeting. And so we might have a special meeting to determine that. So how do these decisions get made about ESY? Well, they have to be made for each individual child based on their unique needs. It is not the school that we can't just have an ESY program for certain students. We have to look at every single child, just like we do for the school year, and their individual needs. We cannot limit the type, amount, or duration. So we can't say, well, we only give ESY 1 hour a week. Because if that doesn't meet the child's unique needs, then that's not going to be appropriate. But remember, ESY is not intended to replace the regular school year. It's not an extension. And we'll talk a little bit about that, about the decision makers. But we got to be careful about saying things. And I gave this as an example. We only offer speech for 1 hour for ESY. And so those are things that we really shouldn't be saying. Now that may be all the child needs, and that we maybe can agree that that's going to suffice. Can't
How,
ever do that.
how
Go ahead.
is the amount of time determined? How do they decide how many hours are appropriate?
Well,
when they're
I'll always say that that's something that there's no magic formula for that. I think teams have to kind of think about, what are we trying to do during this time and how much time do we think it will take? It's very similar, Melissa, really, to what we do when we plan for the IEP.
Mhm,
So if I'm writing an IEP for a child that, because, I spent most of my career working with students with learning disabilities, and I'm looking at, they're at a critical point of instruction, and I want to make sure they're keeping that fluency building going. I
mhm.
might say, you know what, 2 times a week for 30 minutes is really going to be enough for us to maintain that fluency at that critical point of instruction.
Okay.
And so that's an example of that I could give.
Mhm.
Does that make sense?
It does. Yeah, thank you.
Okay. Um, so we do have guidance, and if you click right here, this will go to our process manual, and there's guidance in that from the South Carolina Department of Education. Remember, this is a guidance document, so it is not a regulatory document. It is meant to provide documents to our districts, our IEP teams, to help them with decision making. And so you can always go and check that document out. I think I pulled from that document in a 2-pager, I think, that we're going to share, Melissa, just with some pieces in there. And so I've actually pulled the whole thing and referenced it. But that's where some of this comes from. So who makes that decision? The IEP team. The IEP team determines whether the child is eligible for ESY and what ESY will look like. So we can't have individuals call and say your child's not going to be eligible for IEPs unless the team has had that conversation and already determined that, and the case manager is calling to remind you that that decision's been made. It is
All right.
made. The law is clear.
I have another question with that one too.
Oh, okay.
Of course,
Of course you do.
of course. So whenever the team is having this discussion and say, the school says, we don't think Tommy needs ESY. We don't think he meets the criteria. But if I think that he does, how do we get to a point of agreement? Or is there anything in particular that I can say or show the school that will help with any kind of decision?
Well, as a parent, all decisions you're giving input, and you should be giving meaningful input. And so, first of all, if you had some information to support some of that decision, then that needs to be shared with the IEP team. But remember that, once you share that and make that request and say that, there are a couple of things I want to remind everybody of. Number one, if the district refuses that and says that's not going to be, then they have to give the rationale for why they're doing that. That needs to be provided to you in prior written notice. And so that's really important. If you are, and it could be that once you share your information, the IEP team goes, gosh, we hadn't thought about that, because that's why we have a team. And sometimes I'll just say, as an educator, I'm not thinking the same way, or I've not, maybe your child's getting therapies outside, or there's some things going on that you need to share with the team that are important for us to know. And so we should always be making those decisions and trying to come to consensus. But remember, if you're still in disagreement, you can always go through the process of, that's the wonderful thing about IDEA, is there is a way for you to file and say, I'm in disagreement. And really for ESY, if it's close to the end of the year, there should be an expedited hearing held. And hopefully we wouldn't have to do that. I always hope that teams can come to consensus, because that's what works for everybody. We want our educators spending time and parents working together to improve outcomes, not in court systems and preparing for all that. And so anytime we can do that, we're better off. But the law protects our children. And so that's the most beautiful thing about it. So I hope that answers that question. So here's some things for IEP teams to discuss when they're considering, does the child need ESY? Concerns that regression will occur without ESY. I was talking to a parent not too long ago about a child who has a seizure disorder. And, that's a child that we may want to be seeing. And I don't know all the ins and outs, and I'm not a part of that IEP team, but I've taught some kids with seizure disorders. And so I know that one of the things that happens is they tend to lose, they have short-term memory issues. And so that might be a situation that we would look at. So we can kind of see that, and teachers can kind of say, boy, when we come back from break, it's like, it's a brand new day. We're starting over. And so that's important for us to think about. Now, remember, all kids have some regression. I have regression. When I was still teaching, I would go back at the beginning of the year and go, okay, let me turn on my computer. That's normal, because we're out of the habit. But it's, can we quickly pick up and start doing? It's not, do we have to give reminders and prompts? Because we're all going to have regression if we are removed from something for a little while. I've recently started riding my bike again, and I'm a little older now. That might be part of the problem, but I have to kind of rethink, okay, how do I do this? How do the brakes work? How do they, that's okay. But this is a long term. It takes a long time to regain. The other piece that we've typically said is the student at a critical point of instruction. So I always like to give a couple of examples. I gave one about reading. As a director, we've put students in extended school year because we just got them out on a job. They're a high school student. We're working on their post-secondary transition. We just got them into a job, and for school to end would mean we're removing them from that employment. And so that's not good. And so we want to develop a plan so that we can still provide some coaching out there for that student and make sure they can get to that job, because that would be they're just starting. And they're just starting to make progress. Certainly always the nature and severity of the disability. There's been quite a bit on that, even in case law, for students who need more. And then really to think about those services that are crucial for the student's self-sufficiency, behavior support, or transition. For some students, if we remove that support during the summer, then they will regress. And so it's crucial for them to continue. I think about that particularly with children who have mental illness concerns. If the school is providing that level of support, those are students that we might want to look as that's what their ESY looks like. And Melissa, that would be a great example of where we might just be using the related services. So back to what we were talking about a little bit earlier. So that is kind of a framework. There's no yes, no questions. These are just things that we can discuss. And as a team, we're going to make an informed decision. So there's a section in your IEP in Enrich that has ESY in our state. And here's what it says. Here's the things you should see. The services have to be fully described. So what are they going to be? And it can be all kinds of things. And I think we don't need to limit that. So as a former director, we had some students that we sent to some camps as part of their ESY because those camps were designed for students with disabilities. And the team determined that was going to keep them. We were maybe working on more social aspects with those students than a skill. That was the thing. I mean, there is no limit to what
Okay.
you could look at.
I don't know if you saw my face, Susan, but I mean, I did say to myself, wow, that is so out of the box, and I would not have necessarily thought of that. But that is a great, and it is a need that so many of our kids have, that social emotional need. And that's a great way to meet it. I never thought of that.
We even, and I don't know that they still do this, but in our district, we even had some of our schools that ran summer programs. And so we actually pushed those and the children into those summer programs. And then we provided some support, some additional support there. It's a great time to work on social skills. It's a great time, it just depends. And so I always say what I've always loved about ESY is you can do anything. And so, I as a teacher, I used to provide ESY. And one of my favorite things was I had a student and we were working on math. We never cracked a math book. What we did was we cooked, we made grocery lists and went to the grocery store. We did all kinds of different things that were, I think it's the nice thing, that's fun and you can also really create. Still working on that IEP goal, but I had a lot more liberty in the way that I could deliver the services. And
I'm really glad I'm here in this meeting today because this is very exciting to hear, because I have one that I'm paying Sylvan for extra instruction right now for reading and math. And the other one has the huge social issue where he can't make friends. He doesn't, he's always, I mean, would they both qualify for something like this? They're both autistic and they're both.
I think that always depends on that IEP team and the decisions for those teams. And remember, it doesn't have to replicate a whole summer. It could just be, sometime. And I think teams have to determine that.
And like the one that it has trouble with the reading and the math, he's reading at like he's 14 and he's reading at a 3rd and 4th grade level.
That wouldn't necessarily, and that might be something you want to maybe ask for some further support from at Family Connections. But just because they're reading below level doesn't automatically mean eligibility. Just depends on progress on the goals. Yeah. And so I think those are things you would want to think about and talk with the team about. Also, the ESY section should describe the services in the area. So in other words, it's going to be specially designed instruction and it's going to be in the area of reading, or it's going to be a related service. It's going to be in the area of mental health counseling. And so it needs to say that. And then you have to know the frequency and duration of services and then the start and end date. And so the ESY section says that, has those pieces that have to be in place. I will take just a moment to remind everyone that if the school is doing summer programming for all students, students with disabilities cannot be excluded from summer programming just because they have an IEP. And so we often had students who were eligible for like the summer reading camp or for, a summer school program or something. And so if they meet those eligibility requirements, they can't be excluded just because they have a disability. And so sometimes it's not ESY that does that. Sometimes it's just the regular school program that does that. And so those are always things to check with your school about too. Oh, that's it. I didn't even realize it. I did a great job in a short amount of time. I'm proud of myself.
Why, yes, you did. Thank you. All right, so Susan, I did have a question, and I don't know where would have, because I was thinking it, but I wasn't sure where would be a good place to kind of interject it. You know, in terms of who would provide the extended school year services, you know, if I know that my kid has done fabulously with Miss Griffin, and I would really like for Miss Griffin to be his teacher, how does that work? You know, is there any kind of request system or anything
You
like
can
that?
certainly always ask, but the district is required to provide the service, and you can't, parents are not allowed to.
To
You
say
can
that's
certainly say, hey, this, because number one, teachers are not under contract during that time. And
true.
so, you know, that's one piece, but
Yeah.
also some teachers opt, they don't choose to work during the summer or, you know, whatever. So the district is only required, you know, once ESY has been determined to provide that service. And it's kind of like just the same way as parents can't dictate the hours that suit them for the service.
Okay.
And so if that makes sense, they offer the service. It's just like, you know, we have school from 8 to 2. We don't have it based on individual schedules. And so the law, you know, has been pretty clear about that. Certainly what we used to say is, are there some times, you know, that you're not going to be able to do this? And we would try to work around those things. I think
Right, like
all
summer
IEP
vacation
teams,
or
sure.
Mhm.
We ran ESY in a few of our buildings during the summer so that we could have coordinated efforts. And I will just tell you, the 4th of July, we didn't offer services because that's a big week that people are not going to be there. So that was a break in service. But so those are kind of some things to think about when you're looking at it.
All right. Well, I'm going to ask one quick question and then I'll wrap us up. I do see in the chat that and we have a couple of questions, but I think we'll only get to this one. Karen had asked, when is the best time of year to bring up the desire for extended school year? You know, when is this the best time?
So I think the big thing to think about is when you have your annual review, it should be discussed. But you
Okay.
have to remember, it's not based on the child's behind, and we want to give them, those have not been the criteria for that.
Okay.
And so I think you want to go back to those kind of discussion points. And then if you're still seeing problems closer to the start of school, then that might be a time. I would also always want to say, please ask the school what else they're offering during the summer, because there are summer programs in a lot of our schools.
Okay. All right. That's great. That's good to know. Thank you so much. Well, thank you everybody for joining us today. Do know that on the Family Connection website, we do have a section right at the top that says order materials, and you can go there and there's a plethora of tip sheets and guidebooks and things like that that you can take a look at. It's at the familyyconnectionsc.org website. And then if you look at the top, you'll see order materials. If you just click on that,
There you
then
go.
you'll be exactly.
Sorry.
These are some of the items that you will see. Everything is free of charge. So, and many things are available for download. And so you wouldn't even have to wait for us to send it to you. You can just download it. So I really encourage everybody to do that. If you do need further assistance, if you have more questions, feel free to reach out to Family Connection. I put the referral link in the chat earlier, but you can also call us at the 1-800 number that's listed on your screen. Someone will answer your call and help get you connected with somebody that is either more local to your area or has expertise in the area that you're asking about. So feel free to give us a call. And I thank you again, Susan, for sharing your wealth of information with us. And I look forward to seeing everybody again really soon. All right. Take care,
Thanks.
everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody.